Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. After putting out my What Makes a Song Great on Bohemian Rhapsody, a lot of people asked me, can you put out the full Brian May interview, which is going to be here. But just to let you know, this is on my second channel, Rick Beato 2, so make sure that you hit the subscribe button here. I'm putting longer form content and different kinds of things on here, so don't forget to subscribe. Here's my interview.
Good to see you.
I've seen you a lot. I've seen you a lot too.
Have you?
Yeah, I
watch your stuff avidly. I find myself clicking around about 3 a.m. and I think, oh, there's Rick. And I just have a quick look at what he's doing. And like an hour later, I'm still trawling through your stuff.
Well, I'm honored.
It's great.
I am honored.
Oh no, you're amazing. You're scarily good. You're just, I love the insights and I love the playing and the sound, everything. It's just amazing.
You have been doing a lot of, since COVID started happening, you've been posting. You're on Instagram, doing a lot of social media. I think it's fantastic.
Oh, good, thanks. Yeah, I had to really, because all the avenues got closed down, and I just thought this is all I had. This is the only platform where I can get up and actually communicate with people, and it worked out really well. I think it's a great kind of bonus in my life, really.
My series, What Makes This Song Great, I basically break down these famous songs.
I saw your piece on, I know you quite well now. Saw your piece on Comfortably Numb, which I thought was phenomenal. Now, I was aware of Comfortably Numb, and I know the record, kind of. It was never the big Floyd album for me. I mean, Piper at the Gates of Dawn is kind of the pinnacle for me.
Yeah.
Just perhaps a very old school thing to say, but I still love that because it was just breathtaking and dangerous, whatever. But what I'm trying to say is I was aware of it, but I wasn't aware of it. And listening to your analysis, I became much, much more aware of what was going on in that song and much more appreciative of it. Now, that's rare. Normally you listen to a music critic, and they tend to kind of spoil your enjoyment because they go, oh, yeah, this was taken from here and the guy's being this out of tune and whatever. You don't do that. You say, oh, you know what's in here? Lift up this little corner here. Look what's under here. I love that. So you've interpreted Comfortably Numb to me and made it grow in my estimation and in my life. It's become part of my life. And so thank you for that. There's a lot of good stuff you're doing.
You're very welcome. I appreciate that. And I've been wanting to do Bohemian Rhapsody because so many people have requested it over the last 3 years. It's the most complex song of any song that I honestly can think of. It's the most complex rock song that's ever been written. If you look at the harmonic structure, the chord progressions, the overdubbing of the vocals, the vocal layering, all the different guitar parts, the sounds. I mean, everything about the song, the tempo changes. I want to go back to the recording. It was a long time ago, in 1975, but the things that you could remember from being in the studio then. For example, I've watched interviews where you talk about you sitting in the control room. Well, the other three were actually doing the rhythm track.
Yeah, which is a frequent event. Our backing tracks were either guitar, bass, and drums or piano, bass, and drums. And in this case, it's piano, bass, and drums, yeah. So everything I had to do was going to be after. So I got to be kind of deputy producer or associate producer or something, yeah.
Okay, so how much did you rehearse the song?
Oh, no, we didn't. I don't think we rehearsed it at all. Well, there's a kind of rehearse and record situation in the studio. Generally, we went in there with ideas and we'd start playing around. But in the case of John and Freddie and Roger, they would pick things up very quickly. They would sort of throw things at each other, and very quickly they'd be very much in sync. You've probably listened to the backing track on its own, and it's immaculate, isn't it? There's no click. I mean, Freddie himself was like a metronome, but a metronome with a lot of balls. It had a bite to it, the way Freddie hit that piano. So he was incredible to play with. On the occasions when I'm doing the backing track with him, it's astounding. But Roger would instantly lock in, and Deaky had an amazing knack for just finding the right pocket, the right place to be. And so no, it wasn't really. It was like Freddie would play it. In the case of this, I remember him playing it down in pieces, like this is this piece and this is this piece, and we're like, okay. And then, well, let's try this piece. And he played a bit, and then Roger would join in, Deaky would join in. I'd be in the control room, and pretty quickly it would come together. So if that counts as rehearsal, that's it, I suppose. And generally the whoever was manning the tape machine would be running the whole time, just in case something good happened. And generally by the time they'd run it 3 or 4 or 5 times, they'd have it. They'd have the one. And in those days, we didn't do edits on multi-tracks, really. Occasionally, very, very occasionally, we tried an edit on multi-track, but generally we wanted the good take and we'd do it until the take was good. Much later on, we went and worked with Mac in Munich, and he said, oh, it's no problem, you can just drop in. And we used to drop in all 24 tracks at once, which is like, at the time seemed hair-raising, but he just went, it's fine. And so that was a way of hastening the process. So you didn't have to do the whole take right. You could, if it messed up at one point, say, okay, we'll just drop in here, drop everything in. And it did work. But in these days, no, we just did whole takes.
Okay, so I just have to go back to the original tracking with the 3, with the piano, bass, and drums. Freddie's time is so good. It's not just good, it is phenomenal. The performance, the dynamics. Can you talk about dynamics and about how you guys played so dynamically on that track? And in general, you were an incredibly dynamic band. Did you guys talk about that a lot?
I guess we talked about performance in the studio, yeah, because the trick, as we saw it, was to get yourself in the space where you actually felt you were live. So it wasn't, this is another take. It was, I am on stage, this is it, this is the only chance I get. So you always catch yourself in the act of being spontaneous or being a one-off. That was our sort of philosophy. And it applied to backing tracks, but also to overdubs. Because if you're sitting there doing an overdub and sort of waiting, and then you do it, it's never going to sound right. But if you're kind of playing along and you imagine that you're on stage at Madison Square Garden or whatever, it's going to feel right and it's going to sound right. You're not going to have to try to sync. You're just going to be in it with your body and your soul. So I think that's the way, that was the philosophy. Yeah, we talked about a live performance in the studio rather than a studio performance.
Did you ever think when you're recording songs like this, I mean, you have so many huge hit songs, but did you ever think that, 40, 50 years from now, people will be listening to this, that you'll be, I mean, you guys are massively big to kids. My kids are 14, 12, and 8. They know all your songs. I mean, it's That's unbelievable.
Great. That's wonderful. That's really great. That makes me feel very, very lucky and happy. Yeah, it's great. It's nice that the music does cross the generational boundaries, and I think we're very fortunate. And if you're going to ask me why, I ain't going to be able to answer. I don't, because people do. They say, well, how come, it works for new kids and old kids? I think it's just because we spoke about normal things. I mean, Bohemian Rhapsody is probably not a good example because it's a pretty unusual situation you're talking about. But by and large, what we're talking about, I want to break free, I want it all, stuff like that. It's the hopes and dreams of every man. It's not like rock star talk. And Bohemian Rhapsody isn't rock star talk either. It's about a character in fantasy, I would say. It's projected on a fictional character. And of course, who knows exactly what's in Freddie's mind, but he's managed to kind of distance himself from what he's saying enough to be able to paint that picture. Answering the question that you didn't ask, I think there's a kind of, in spite of all the pomp and glamour and sort of bigness of Queen, we're very much a kind of people's band. I think we talk about what people want to know about, I think, and the disappointments, the pain, the problems in love and in relationships and stuff, and the hopes and dreams. That's kind of what we deal in, I think.
When you were going to introduce a song to the band to be considered for recording, what was that like? Was it, even though you guys had played together, for years, was it always kind of, I've got a new song, here it is, and you're kind of nervous a little bit about playing for the other guys?
Yeah, I think we're all a bit that way. Yeah, I've got this thing, I don't know if it's any good, but I got this, I got this riff, and I got this, and it's kind of about this, and everyone goes, yeah, okay. So I think you feel kind of some trepidation, But you quickly get over it because then you want to get people involved, and in the case of myself, I'd pretty soon be telling people what to do. I have to kind of stop myself doing that because the group situation benefits from having an equal input from everybody. But I guess there was an unwritten law that the author of the song, the guy who brought it in, would have the final say in the mix and everything. But along the way, I think we trained ourselves to step back and let the band possess it and develop it. And I think everything benefited from that. We were a powerful interactive force with each other, very critical with each other, quite horrible with each other sometimes. Like, you can't do that. It's naff. It's crap. You can't do that. Yeah, I can, and well, you're doing this, that's why it isn't working. But then you come to the point where, okay, this seems to work. This is good.
So, Brian, you hear songs your entire life like Bohemian Rhapsody, but there was a time when it didn't exist, okay? And you actually have to go in, you write the songs, and then actually record all the parts, mix it, right? And in this case, there were all the bouncing, which I want to talk about in a second, about bouncing vocals and things. But you're tracking, you're there in the control room with Roy, I imagine. You guys are sitting there, and these guys are playing the takedown.
Crucially, Mike Stone as well, yeah.
Yeah, and you're like, okay, that was pretty good. After they've done this unbelievable rhythm track, I mean, did you realize that, okay, that was amazing? Or was it kind of like, yeah, that was great, I think we can work with that?
Yeah, I think a bit of all of that, yeah, because partly you're in it and it's a kind of little industry, but partly it is exciting. It's wonderful to hear stuff developing and to be a part of it. So, yeah, I think we were always excited, actually. Yeah, it's like, yeah, will that do? Yeah, I think that'll do. No, that's great. We'll have that. And why don't we try this? It was a lovely sort of continual updating process and chucking things in to see if they work. Yeah, I think we were always excited, which is the great thing, I suppose.
Now, as far as your guitar playing, I mean, you're a massive influence on me. Your
really?
Lyrical style, oh my God, your vibrato, everything about your playing was a huge influence on me. I started playing guitar in 1975. These are the first things that I learned were your songs. I mean, this came out literally right when I started playing guitar.
Well, I had no idea. I mean, you're a phenomenal guitar player, apart from everything else that you do. And I was watching you. I don't know how I discovered you. I sort of drifting around 3 o'clock in the morning and thinking, oh, what's that? And finally, I think I saw you talking. I don't know what the first thing I saw you talking about, but it was like a critique of a piece of music. And mostly people's critiques are very negative, but you were just finding more and more stuff and bringing stuff out to the audience and making them aware of all the little nuances. So I thought, this guy's great. But then I heard you play guitar and I thought, oh, shit, I don't want to talk to him because he's, he can do all this stuff that I can't do, and he's going to embarrass me. That's going to be too scary. I don't want to talk to him. So,
Brian, yeah, I literally learned guitar by learning your solos. I mean, this is the first things that I was learning. Everybody wanted to play. Of course, I played the solo all wrong and everything, but at least I was trying to do it.
But then you listened to Jaco Pastorius and became a super god.
Okay, so I want to ask you
the simple stuff that you started on.
I want to ask you some guitar questions, but I don't want to ask you all the normal stuff that you've talked about a million times. I want to ask you, like, did you use 8s on your guitar? 8-gauge strings?
Yeah.
Everybody I knew back in the 70s played really light-gauge strings.
Well, yeah, of course, I come from a generation before you, and we didn't have 8-gauge strings. The Fender and Gibson sets were 10s or 11s or whatever.
Right.
And that's what I started off with. But then the rumor went around that if you went down to Clifford Essex and Cambridge Circus, you could get a banjo string, which you could put on your guitar, and you could use that as the top string. And that was the key to everything, because suddenly you could move all the strings over and you could start bending strings. So that was the most fantastic thing that happened to us as kids. Watching Eric Clapton at Eel Pie Island or the Crawdaddy or whatever, and thinking, yeah, that's what he's done. He's been down to Clifford Essex and he's got his banjo strings. That's why he can bend those strings. I wanted to do what James Burton did on the Hello Mary Lou solo. That's what got me going. Suddenly the guitar wasn't the backing instrument anymore. I mean, I heard Django Reinhardt. I heard, which is phenomenal. You must be into Django Reinhardt.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you can play that. I can't play that stuff. I'm sure you can. I tried when I was a kid, but he wasn't bending the strings. It was still, and it was totally, it was like an amplified acoustic. The Django Reinhardt instrument, I would say. I listened to Charlie Bird. There wasn't much around to listen to when I was a kid in terms of pure guitar playing. Apart from, I had a Segovia record, a Julian Bream record. I started to try and learn classical stuff. I had Charlie Bird playing jazz stuff.
Yep.
And Chet Atkins, who was a phenomenon. I wish I'd met that guy, who was doing all kinds of stuff, including picking and sort of multi-tracking and all sorts of stuff. And I sort of vicariously, I got to hear Les Paul, because that was sort of pre my generation, really. That was kind of my dad's generation.
Yeah.
But I got hold of some Les Paul records and tried to figure out what he was doing. And a lot of the time he was speeding things up, of course. But at the same time, he was a very dexterous player. So years later, I played with him and he was phenomenal. Grumpy old sod, but phenomenal. A bit like me, really. So yeah, this string thing is funny. Yeah, of course. Another reason I like the nines opposed to the eights is because you get a little bit more. See, I'm going to contradict myself. You get a little bit more level out of that. Mm-hmm. And in the days before we had radio links, that tiny little bit more level going down the wire would help the sustain. It wouldn't help the sound necessarily, but it would help the sustain. It would just make it go. Okay. These days I can cheat because we have a lovely radio link, which Pete is just updating from analog to digital. Horror of horrors, but it will still work, I think. But with that, you can just tweak it up a little bit and you can just cheat that little extra bit of gain, which will give you a bit more feedback. And I sort of find it hard to do without that now. And I tend to ask for it in the studio as well as on stage because I'm used to it now. I'm used to that force coming behind me.
So I have an AC30 behind me that I've had forever, and they're incredibly loud amps.
They are. Strangely enough, I have one right here.
Brian, how loud would you play back then? I mean, it just sounds like on Bohemian Rhapsody, it sounds like the amp is ready to explode. It sounds incredibly loud. At least it has that power to it.
Yeah, it's 11. You know, it's as loud as it goes. Very Spinal Tap in it. Yeah, no, it is totally, yeah. I always did that. Everything's always full up, really. Not all the time, but for the bits where you're trying to go for it, yeah. And it's the guitar. I learned this from Rory Gallagher, who's the master of sound that I used to go and see when I was a kid. I'll tell you lots of Rory Gallagher stories. But he told me in person when I was a kid and, you know, still at college, not a rock star at all. He said, Brian, I have this guitar and I have this AC30 amp, which has a particularly beautiful, sweet sound like nothing else. And I have this little box, which was the Rangemaster treble booster. Yeah. And that's what sits in the middle. And he said, that's what makes it speak. That's what gives me my sound. So I went off the next day down to Wardour Street, bought myself 2 AC30s, found a Rangemaster, plugged it all in, and that was my sound. And it hasn't really changed in the 40, 50 years since. That's my sound.
In the studio, when you're doing these records, would you have a standard setup for miking the amps, or did you not even care about that?
No, we cared a lot. No, we spent a lot of time miking things up. And a lot of the time, I had a little trick, which was to turn everything up full but not play. So you just get this sound. And I'd have it in headphones. I would be in the studio, not in the control room. And I'd say, look, turn it all up for me. And I would hear the sound coming back from the amp in front of my speakers. And I could tune the sound by moving the mic around, like onto the axis of the speaker or a little bit off, finding another speaker, trying another speaker. And I would tune it until it sounded like that sort of, the sort of broadest, what Ed Van Halen would call a brown sound. That's what I was looking for. The sound that would act like a voice. So yeah, we did a lot of miking stuff. Also, we used to put mics in the back of the amps to get a little bit of more lively kind of sound and tune that as well. Then we'd have a mic somewhere at the edge of the booth to get a bit of ambience if we wanted it. I was very into ambience because of our first experiences in the studio where it was robbed we were robbed of our ambience, because Roy Baker, love Roy Baker, but he was very much the Trident sound guy. And the Trident sound was sticky tape on everything, deaden it all down, and then add echo later to make it sound big. Well, it doesn't work. Not really. Right. It makes, as you know. And Roy used to say, it'll be all right in the mix. And I'd go, okay. And this is the first album time. I'd go, okay, Roy, but we don't really like that sound. If you listen to the first album, the drums go, and that's it.
Yeah.
No matter how much stuff you put on them, unless you put samples on much later, as you know, you can't make them sound good. So same with the guitar. There wasn't any ambience, and we all regretted it, and we all got together with Roy after that first album. Even though it was a good album, I think the sounds were not what we wanted, and we said we never want to do this again. So when we started making Queen 2, we moved the drums out of that little drum booth, took all the tape off them, put them in the middle of the studio, put mics all over the place, and suddenly instead of they went, and that was it. So we became an ambient. We were hungry for ambience, and I'm pretty sure Led Zeppelin went through a similar thing, and Deep Purple. I hear stories of Deep Purple putting drums in lift shafts and things, to get that genuine room sound, which you cannot really reproduce.
You can't fake it. You can't fake it with reverb. There's something about having the room react and having the microphones in the room that's so important.
Totally. Yeah. So that's it. We wandered off topic, didn't we? But it's all fun.
On your first solo in Bohemian, did you have the idea for the solo just from listening to what Freddie was playing during the solo section? Did the melody idea just come to you?
Yeah, I had ample opportunity because I'm sitting in the control room listening to them do it over and over again.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I said, I think we talked about solos. I don't know how the thing came up, but I think Freddie said, what do you want for the solo? What do you need? And I said, I would like basically a piece of a verse. I want to be joining in and taking the story a bit further. So I want a verse pattern. And so they built that into the backing track, and I could hear it in my head. And I'm sort of, I come from a strange place. I come from a world where Mantovani and the Laughing Policeman were in the hit parade, so my melodies are not really rock melodies as such. I could just hear something very sweet and melodic, which seemed to be a continuation of what Freddie was doing, telling his story in the vocal. That might sound pretentious, or it might sound plain stupid, I don't know, but I hear always hear the solo piece as part of the vocal. It's just like the vocalist hands over to somebody momentarily who's going to continue the story and then give it back to the main raconteur, who's the vocalist.
The Deaky box, can you tell me about that? What is that exactly?
I could probably even show it to you if we may be able to show you that. Deaky was a bit of a genius, really. He got a first class honours in electronics at Chelsea University about the time when I got my first degree and was failing my second degree, only to return 30 years later to get my doctorate. It's another story. But Deaky was very clever with electronics, and he found a piece of electronic equipment, which I think is a piece of a radio or something. Now, somebody's going to tell me I'm wrong, but it's a printed circuit board with some stuff on. And he thought, that's a nice little amp. I'll hook it all up. And he found some speakers from a sort of local hi-fi thing, which was also in the skip, I think. And he put the two together, and this is it. This is a Deaky amp. It says on there, I've written on. And it just sounds like nothing else, really. It saturates in a particular way, which is almost impossible to reproduce. We've had teams of crack scientists working on this for years. There's a great guy called Nigel Knight who's just about managed it recently. But I'm going to show you Pete, who's just put this in. Here he is. He looks after all my stuff.
Hey, Pete.
All right.
Pete.
Good to meet you.
He's Rick Piatto. So this is the Deaky. And, it's another thing like the ambience thing. There is nothing which can reproduce this kind of sound that I have ever found. There's racks and racks of all these beautiful saturation things and compressors and phasers and whatever. Nothing sounds like this.
Okay, now what would that have been used on? Was that used on Bohemian on any tracks?
Yeah, it was used first by John himself, I think on Misfire, and he did that multi-tracking all himself. We just left him to it, and he used this amp. And I said, I can't remember what I said, but I started using it. I could make up a story, but I'm not going to. Started using it for my stuff. But I started using it on, well, I don't know when the first time was, but all that stuff in Good Company where I'm pretending to be a clarinet and a trumpet and a trombone. That's all the Deaky stuff. But I was using some volume pedals and wah-wah pedals for tone with that as well. But I've used it for loads of stuff, like the God Save the Queen track that I did, which is all multi-tracked. Fairy Fella's Masterstroke has lots and lots of little Firefly guitars, all in harmony and stuff. It's all this thing, because it can sound like a violin or it can sound like a trumpet, depending on where you put the mic, very much, or how hard you drive it and what pickups you got.
What does it have? Just like a 6-inch speaker in it or something?
I think it's smaller than that. I think it's 4-inch speaker, probably. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, that's it. That's the original one right there.
Yeah, and there's nothing. I would use the treble booster, and sometimes, a wah-wah pedal, which I would set to a particular point to get a certain coloration rather than wahing, no actual moving, just using it as a tone control. But that was my setup, and it's very low tech, but my God, it works. And Deaky's been very kind enough to let me have it in perpetuity, because I did fall in love with it, and I used it for all kinds of stuff. Or the other thing that I love about this was, one of its great moments, I think, is the solo in Winter's Tale. Mm-hmm. Talking years later now, the very final album that we made when Freddie had already passed away.
Yeah.
And I had that solo in my head, and I had this little amp in my head for about a year and a half, because all kinds of stuff happened. We were in such grief after losing Freddie, we just didn't want to look at the material for a long time. And then we came back in the studio, and I hadn't let anybody touch A Winter's Tale because it was such a precious thing. Also Mother Love, those tracks I just thought, I don't want anyone to look at until I look at them, because I know the way they should turn out. And so I plugged this in here in Allerton, in Surrey, where I am now. And having had this kind of tune in my head for all that time, all those months and months, started playing it through this amp, and it spoke to me. It was just like the sound of the mountains in Switzerland where the song was written, the duck house where Freddie used to sit and do his writing and relaxing. And it was, this amp has a definite magic to it. Yeah. Strangely enough, Steve Vai's just been in touch with me. Steve, one of my favorite people in the whole world. Wonderful, extraordinary musician, and the nicest guy in the world, the greatest gentleman. And he's had a guy build something very much like the Deaky, and he's got his own logo merged with mine on it. And they're going to make me one, because they say it's great. So I'm going to swap him. I'm going to do him one of ours, and we'll compare notes.
So I want to ask you about the vocal layering and the bouncing that was going on. So for the people that are listening to this or watching this that don't know about bouncing, I will explain it, but
yeah,
there's really nothing like this. You guys were on a 24 track, but there are so many vocal tracks, and you had to pre-mix all these layers of vocals.
I guess it's because we started off with 4-track and then 8-track and then 16-track, and we realized how precious the tracks were.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, when we made this record called Earth, I think it was on 4-track, and we had to drop the solo into the vocal track and then drop it out quick when the vocal comes back in, and you can hear it.
Yeah.
I have seen. You're never going to get rid of that drop-in sound. So we were very conscious that we didn't want to be dropping in on a track something foreign. Every track would be pristine and would only have that instrument on it. So having said that, like you say, you have to clear up as you go along, which means you have to make a lot of decisions as you go along, which you can't go back on.
Right.
So, for instance, you've already used up quite a lot of tracks on drums. I forget exactly how many. You probably have that in front of you. There's probably like 7 or 8 tracks for drums. There's guitars, there's bass, whatever. So you might have, I don't know, a dozen tracks left to play with to do the vocals. That's not very many if you're doing a lot of overdubs.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, we'd have it all mapped out. In the case of Bohemian Rhapsody, Freddie's come in with his piece of paper with his little notes all over it. It's his dad's company note paper. And he's written like A, B, C, C sharp, F, whatever. for every line of because he's worked them out on the piano, which something that we very often do. Just work out all the nice harmonies on the piano, and then you just steam through them. You'd like turning the sausage machine, play them on the piano. We learn it, we sing it, and generally the three of us would sing it at the same time. And for Bohemian Rhapsody, we kind of sang them in character. There's a kind of acting thing going on because we're not going Bismillah, we're going Bismillah. You know, we are sort of being these strange characters in the scenario which Bohemian Rhapsody is. So it's partly sort of Arabian, it's partly very English. No, we will not let you go, you know, and we're sort of being these characters, the three of us. So we sing the line and we make sure it's nice. And it's probably, maybe a couple of lines that we sing. And we listen to it and make sure it's all in tune and in time, wherever we feel good. And the thing, like I said before, it's got to sound spontaneous. It mustn't sound like we're trying to get it right on the beat. It's got to be like, we're singing it on stage and the spontaneity is there. So we have the one track. We then sing it again. We double it, listening to the first one in our headphones. And we check that there's no nasty grating. It's roughly in tune with the other one. Not too much in tune, because I think you've been here as well. If you make it perfectly in tune, it's not going to sound big. It's going to sound
small.
So you there's a sort of reality about it. You sing it, and that happens because you're singing it with passion and spontaneity, and you do go a little bit above and below. So it starts to sound nice and fat. Then normally we do three. So you have three tracks on the tape machine, and each of those tracks has three voices on it. Now that's 9 tracks. So you're already getting a bit shaky. So you've got to get rid of that. You've got to just compress them down. So we would listen to them back, bounce them, balance or bounce, whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
Make sure they're all balanced up so you can hear them all equally, roughly. Maybe spread them throughout a stereo, bounce them to a stereo, or if you're really short of tracks, bounce them to the mono and hope that you can fix it, make things big later on. So that's one part. We would then do the same for maybe the next harmony line up, the next harmony line after that. Sometimes we would do octaves. So then each time we're bouncing them down, you're building up and building up. And sometimes you've got to bounce your bounce because and then you start, it's dodgy because there's a certain amount of loss in analog tape. It's a lovely sound, but you are losing every time. You're not cloning, you're actually losing some quality every time. And in the case of Bohemian Rhapsody, I'm sure you know this story, we started thinking, we're losing a lot of quality on this. We're losing all the top. Maybe we better put some top end back on this. Why is this happening? And then Roy takes the tape off the machine. The tape is 2-inch, holds it up to the light, and you can see through the tape.
Oh, so that's actually true then?
Yeah. So because the machine was faulty, to be honest. There was a piece of, I think it wasn't as smooth as it should have been. So it's going over the record head or the playback head, and a little bit of the oxide is getting scraped off each time.
Yeah.
And you can see a pile of kind of sawdust underneath the head. You can see this oxide, this brown oxide stuff, which is the piece of your music that you've just lost.
Yeah.
So what we did was we quickly copied the tape across and started again. I mean, not starting again, but started with a fresh piece of tape with the information that we had. Because if we'd gone on any further, we would have lost everything. And of course, that gives you an idea, because later on we started doing that routinely so that we would have what we would call a slave machine.
Yeah.
So you can actually run these two machines in sync and effectively get more and more tracks. And that became a thing for a while. Of course, with analog, they wouldn't sync up perfectly, so you had to be a little careful, or things would phase when you didn't want them to phase. But when digital tape came along, I don't know, does anybody still know about digital tape?
I do.
Yeah, you do, okay. Well, you get digital tape now, you can sync those up exactly. They will lock in, so you have effectively hundreds of tracks if you want, all on different bits of tape, all on different machines, and you have a sort of infinite recording studio. That's before things got to be digital in the sense of on hard disks instead of tape.
So Brian, if Pro Tools were around, right, back then, would you have made the same kind of music? Would you have made Bohemian Rhapsody like that if it were that easy?
Yeah, I think you just use what you've got in front of you and you use it to its best effect. And some of the stuff we could do in the early days is actually better than you can do with Pro Tools, I think. Pro Tools gives you an enormous amount of choice. Can't get away from that. But there are certain things you could do with the old analog stuff, which it's hard. There's a feel to it. Now, I saw your thing on tuning the other day, which is great. It's a magnificent piece that you did on auto tuning and stuff, and what it means in music, and in Munich. Now, I used to do that before there was any digital stuff. There was a little machine, an analog machine called a Publison, French machine. You ever come across that?
Yeah.
It did a lot of stuff, including phasing, but one of the things was a little pitch change. One little knob did pitch change. So if we had a great vocal and there was just one note in it which was a little sharp, so it made it sound weird, a little flat, I would run it through there and I would tweak the Publison when it came to that bit and re-record it on another track.
Yeah.
So effectively, I'm doing auto-tune. And this is 19.
Yeah, but you're still doing it by ear, though, Brian. That's
exactly. You've got a feel to it. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So in some ways, it's better because you're listening rather than watching on the screen. Because that's a trap to fall into. You can believe what you're seeing, and it's not really what you're hearing, right?
Right.
We've all done that.
Yes.
You can test it. You can do it. We can all fool each other, and it's embarrassing, because people say, "Oh, can you just sharpen that note a bit? It's a bit flat." And they go, "Yeah, how about this?" And you see it happen on the screen, and you go, "Oh, yeah, that sounds much better." And then the guy says, "Oh no, actually, I didn't do it." And then you feel really stupid.
When I listen to the drum tracks, that you can hear that tape compression, the beautiful tape compression on the low end of the kick drum, on the toms. It sounds like nothing else. And this really sounds, you guys are hitting the tape hard. I can tell that.
And Roy was really into that. Yeah, it's not just the tape, though. I mean, there's a lot of compressors in there, the analog compressors. It's a whole chain of things, and the tape is the last compressor in the line, really.
Right.
But Roy was into really overdoing it, especially the snare drum. He just turned it up and up and up, and he'd go, "Oh, that sounds nice and distorted, doesn't it, Neddy?" We go, "Roy, maybe a little too far there." You can hear it on some things, like the jazz album. It's very extreme. But yeah, I'm a fan of the way tape sounds and always will be.
So, Brian, looking back on this, how many years later, 46 years later, Bohemian Rhapsody, do you ever go back and actually just put it on or listen to it? Or if it comes on in the car when you're driving, will you turn it off?
Oh, no, no, I won't turn it off. No, I'll turn it up because I don't get a chance to listen to it at home, really. I very seldom do that stuff. I started listening to my solo stuff just recently because I'm doing reissues. Yeah. And that was a revelation to me. And I just thought, I never sit down and listen to our stuff, really. If it comes on in the car, it's great. It's like being a kid. The first time you hear your record played on somebody else's radio is an enormous thing. It's like suddenly you've become part of the fabric of society. I remember waking up when we were mixing Night at the Opera, and I'd been working all night on the Prophet song, trying to get all these delays working and everything, trying to mix it. And I woke up and I could hear it. And I thought, am I imagining this? But no, Kenny Everett had given it to my neighbor upstairs, and my neighbor was playing it incredibly loud on his radio. So that's what I woke up to. And it was horrible, but it was also wonderful because I thought, oh my God, what we're doing is actually in the world. It's part of what people are experiencing right now. This is being welded into their lives at this moment. What an amazing thing that is.
Is there anything that you want to say or that you've never talked about in relation to this song?
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, that somebody's never asked you before that you say, this is kind of an interesting thing.
I'll tell you a little story about the end of Rhapsody. Now, the end, everything's coming down. It's coming towards the conclusion, and the guitars are sort of going da, 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 in harmony. And then the piano comes back in. Nothing really matters. And I remember soon after we'd done it, listening to it on the radio and thinking, the piano's gone out of key. What's gone wrong? Why is the piano sounding weird? It sounds flat. The reason is that I'd pushed those guitars too hard and edged them up. So the guitars were a little sharp. And so your perception is that the piano comes in too low, right? And it bothered me for years. And I didn't talk about it to people because it's a bit embarrassing. I'm not embarrassed now. I don't care now. But when we came to remix it for the surround, the 5.1 surround mix, which I'm hugely proud of. I don't know if you ever heard that mix, but we did that.
I have not.
We did it in Los Angeles with the guy who mixed Frank Sinatra. I forget his name. He's a wonderful guy. And Roy and some dear friends of mine. And we sat there for days mixing everything, redoing Bohemian Rhapsody so everything came from all around you. You've got to hear it sometime. And when it came to that bit, I thought, I'm not standing for this. So I got in and I tuned all the guitars and they're spot on. And now when the piano comes in, it sounds perfect. So that was a sort of circle that I had to complete, and it was very nice feeling for me to do that. So that's my admission story.
Well, I never noticed it, so.
Well, if you didn't notice it, chances are not that many people did, but I did.
But that shows you how people, when they're actually making a record, those kind of things that they obsess about when you're the artist and it's your music. Yeah. You hear things that other people don't hear.
Yeah. It's also a whole topic for your series if you want, what happens when you do vibrato on a guitar string, because it's not a sine wave. Like with the tremolo arm, you can make it go above and below and it's perfectly centered on the note. When you're doing this on the string and stretching it, the only way it can go is up.
Sharp, right.
So it has to go sharp, which is a weird thing, isn't it? And you can hear it on so many records. If people get into it, which is nice if they do, they're really pushing the vibrato. So it goes too sharp and everything does start sounding flat. So you've got to be really aware of that. And I like to use the tremolo arm to do a little adjustment if it's a sensitive area, so that it actually does stay in. And sometimes I use the tremolo like Hank Marvin to do the vibrato instead. And that's a nice effect too as well, because it also works on all the strings. If you're on a chord, you can make the whole thing just gently ripple, and it ripples around the center line. It's a sine wave. It's not up, up, up. So it's not like a violin. Guitar is different from a violin in that way. Violin, the guy can make it go
above and below. Yeah.
Yeah.
One other thing that I always forget to ask people is, back then, what would you tune to? Would you tune to the piano? Would you have a tuner? How often would you tune?
Not often enough, some people would say. We used to say we tune to the A30. The A30 is a road which comes out of London and takes you down to the West Country. I thought you were going to talk about this. I thought you were going to get me to play this thing.
Oh, if you want to play, well, I didn't know if you were set up to play or not.
Well, you told me I had to be, or somebody told me.
Well, great, I did. I was like, I didn't know if you guys were ready to do that or not.
Well, we could be. I didn't want to set up a little amp because it wouldn't be me really. So we have the AC30 over there. It's about 15 yards in that direction in a room.
Okay, can I hear what it sounds like here?
I don't know how that comes across. There's a lot of ambience on that, but that's the sound of these two pickups out of phase. So it's very graunchy. It's very. You got to. I probably need a sixpence, but it's a harsh sound. But it's good for the it's good for this. Seeing as we're on the subject of Bohemian Rhapsody, it's for. It's the wrong period. It's good for the harmonics. It screeches, but if I turn this pickup the other way around, so they're in series, they sound very. And it's a very warm sound, and I love the fact that this guitar will make all these different sounds. My favorite is putting these two pickups in phase here. That gives me my sort of Tie Your Mother Down sound and the general rhythm sound. It's sort of tough. It's very much like Ed Van Halen's putting his pickup right here to get his brown sound, because the combination of these two gives you the harmonics that you need. It's quite tough, but it's warm. I don't know how that's coming across because it's a long way away, but it needs to be, probably. All right.
That's it. Brian, on the on the solos at the end when you're doing all those harmony parts, the kind of cascading things in the guitar, it sounds like you're changing the phase of the pickups. You're changing pickup combinations on each part. Is that true?
Yeah, Rhapsody, I had this thing I wanted to use every combination. It just seemed to want it because there's so many differences in mood throughout the song, like you said. So yeah, I think I used every combination in the heavy bit. You know, ding 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 ding. Every time that happens, it's on a different setting, right up to the end where there's an octave piece, and they sort of go in octave, and it's the harshest sound of all there, I think. But yeah, those pieces at the end. What am I doing there? I can't remember. I think that's a bit of Deaky there. There's a combination of Deaky and the AC30s on that track.
Got it. I was wondering about that because some of it doesn't sound like your regular setup.
Yeah, it would only be Deaky. It would only be the AC30 or the Deaky amp.
Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah, I've thrown everything else out by then. On Sheer Heart Attack, I remember using a Fender Twin amp or something to get that sort of rock and roll, like Mott the Hoople kind of sound for Now I'm Here. But I think that's the last time I ever used a different amp in the studio.
You can't really go wrong with an AC30.
No, they're beautiful. It's another whole program. Why is that? There are good reasons behind that, which you know, I'm sure. It's the configuration of the way the output valves are set up. And you don't get distortion at low levels like you would in a Marshall amp. It's part of the Marshall sound, but in the AC30, it's very pure at low levels. Everything's like hi-fi. And as you go up the curve, at each end, it bends around. It goes straight like this, and then it straightens out that way. So you get a gradual journey into compression and eventually distortion, but it's really smooth. That's what I love about. Do one more time. The AC30s, and let me see if I can show you what I mean. At the very low volume, it's very kind of liquid and metallic, and you can hear every note, and no note interferes with any other.
Right.
As you turn it up, it starts to get a little more creamy, and things start to interfere with each other. But if you're clever, you make them interfere in a nice way, like the fifths and the fourths and whatever will give you a nice sort of creamy sound. So turning up. And you can still, the funny thing about the AC30 is you can still play discords and it doesn't sound that bad. In fact, it's rather nice. You get all this strange kind of interaction of the harmonies, like this chord here, you know, which is what I use for Radio Gaga when we do it live. It just gives a nice breadth because it's you can still hear all the notes, but they're really messing with each other and making all these strange sort of overtones that weren't there in the beginning, you know? It's not quite as sweet. So I'm holding this the whole time just to try and just kind of edge things into sweetness, I suppose.
And are you, when I know you're re-releasing all your solo records now.
Yeah.
And do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah. Thought you'd never ask. Yeah. Yes, Back to the Light is out. I'm thrilled. It took us a long time to just polish it up. We didn't actually change any of the mixes, but we looked carefully at the remastering and the packaging and how it was cut and the color of the vinyl, all these sort of things which to me are part of the process, you know, how it feels, how it smells. This is important stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm thrilled. We now have the box set. I don't know. I don't think I have the box here, but this is what's inside it. And the vinyl is the key piece, really. The vinyl is what people love. Did you know, in Britain at least, the vinyl has overtaken the CD in terms of sales now?
Wow.
Yeah, it's the biggest seller. I was in EMI yesterday, and they said vinyl is now our biggest physical seller. Isn't that amazing?
That's actually great.
Yeah, it's brilliant. People have an appreciation of what it's like. It's wonderful. You know, you take it out, you feel it, you smell it, and you have you have an experience with it, because you get good stuff to read. You get nice big pictures. You get a booklet which is big, has lovely pictures. My booklet is gorgeous. You will love it. And then here's the pièce de résistance, the actual
Awesome.
final thing itself, which you hit yourself with, and you put on your turntable and you put your little needle on, and magic happens. Human magic. Oh, Pete's got me a box. Thanks, Pete. Yeah, this is the box. So inside here is
Beautiful. Wow.
Yeah, I love it. You get a white vinyl record in here as well, which is really a bit special. And you get the CD original exactly as it was, and you get another CD which is all things that weren't actually included in the original sort of bonus tracks, but some of them are live and stuff. Like one of them is a live version of Time of the Down that we did with Slash on the Jay Leno show. Just things which happened in that epoch. So to me, I love it because it's buttoned it all up. And when I die, these things will be scattered around the world, and they will be the best that could possibly be done with that part of my life. So I'm very happy with this. It's not going to sell billions, but to me, it's defining what I think is some of my best work. And it was done under probably the most painful conditions of my life, because I was deeply depressed. And Back to the Light is about that. It's about finding a way out of the darkest place that there is. So well, there it is. That's my bit of promotion. Thank you very much.
Brian, you're such a great singer. I mean, you're not only one of my favorite guitar players, but you're also, I mean, beyond your songwriting, you're such a great singer. I mean, it's really incredible to have a band that has so many people that can sing it in Queen. And when I hear your solo records, it's just you're just amazingly good singer.
Oh, thank you.
Even the times that you sing on Instagram that I see, I always think to myself, wow.
Oh, that's very nice of you. Yeah, well, it was stiff competition in Queen, you had to keep your end up, because Roger's a terrifyingly good singer. He sang in his own band prior to being in Queen. He was the singing drummer, the legendary singing drummer of Cornwall. Mm-hmm. And he would sit there and he would sing all the songs. So Roger, and he has a really excellent voice. And so the three of us, John wouldn't sing. John was just not of the singing ilk. He just wouldn't do that. He said, no. Even when you imagine he's trying to tell Freddie how to sing Another One Bites the Dust, and he doesn't sing. That's quite interesting. So he's playing bits on the piano, and he's given Freddie the words on the piece of paper, and he's like, no, another one. It's like. But the three of us, we were kind of, I suppose, sort of fiercely competitive in a way. But we were aware that together it was such a great, fortunate thing, because Freddie had that incredible sort of razor edge to his voice, beautiful sort of silken razor. Roger had a sort of very broad sound, very high top, sort of huskiness on the top and quite a bit on the bottom. And I had something in the middle. I had a sort of warmth, and if I pushed it, I would sort of get into the more husky territory. But the three voices together had a natural blend, which you couldn't buy. It just worked. Whenever the three of us were on there, and we did it, well, 3 times, like I told you, with the multi-tracking, that was the sort of Queen sound. We didn't have to try very hard to do that.
Would you sit there, would Freddie go over to the piano, though, and say, hey, this is our line, we're going to sing here, let's practice this for a second, and play it?
Yeah, we'd always have the piano at hand, and so the next line is, and we got, okay, run it, and we would just run it.
No problem.
Yeah, because
there's some really weird interlines, though.
There are
very weird chromatic lines in Bohemian Rhapsody. Oh my God!
Yeah,
really intricate lines.
Yeah, that really makes it fun though, because you got to learn things which. It's hard, but it's fun to do that. And when it works, when you hear it coming back in your phones, it's just magic, because suddenly it all blends together. And Freddie had done his homework. See, Freddie was very industrious in those days, and he would come in with it all sorted. Later on, he was much more like sort of laissez-faire. So even like Crazy Little Thing, he said, "Oh, Brian, you do some harmonies, just tell us what to sing." And so he had the knack of letting go, which he developed over the years. But Rhapsody, he's on the button. He's on every harmony, every single one. It's amazing.
Yeah, his pitch is so ridiculously good too. Yeah. The whole intro, it's just, it's so beautiful. It's just the blend, everything of it, and it's just the the tuning is astounding.
Yeah, he had amazing. He's a self-made man. He went in the studio when we first went in, and he'd been singing with us live. We'd been rehearsing and writing and everything, and he was pretty out of control, I have to say. I mean, even he knew it. He'd run around screaming and posing and whatever, but the vocals would be kind of all over the place. He went in and we laid, I think, 4 tracks down, and Freddie said, I'm not having this. This is not good enough. I don't want to sound like that. And he went in again and again and again and worked on it, listened to it coming back, and molded himself into that singer. So by the time he's on Bohemian Rhapsody, he's phenomenal. After Bohemian Rhapsody, the record after that is The Day at the Races. If you listen to a song called You Take My Breath Away, he does an introduction for that, where he's multi-tracked it all himself. And it's so close, it all phases. He's so accurate.
So in tune, yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. That's not an effect. There is no effect on there whatsoever. You listen to it, and it's all just delicately phasing with itself. All the separate parts. It's beautiful. I never heard anybody do that quite to that degree of perfection. Yeah, Freddie just became kind of superhuman in doing that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing.
He had Freddie wouldn't have called himself an intellectual, but he had incredible vision, and he was utterly unforgiving of himself. So he would never let it go until it was perfect. And he'd work and work and work, and if it wasn't right, he'd try and figure out why. And dedicated, lived it, loved it, just all his life loved it.
Doing the breakdown, I've done the whole introduction, everything, and it's difficult to figure out how to talk about it because there's so many parts to it. I mean, I started out by doing a breakdown of the harmonies in the introduction. He starts out with a B flat 6 chord. He's singing D, F, G, B flat is the first voicing he sings. And then I go through and I kind of play on the piano and talk about these and talk about the progressions. And I like to do it from that. And then I like to talk about the songs from a production point of view, and explain about. I'll talk about bouncing and things like that. Give people because people that will watch this will be people that don't know anything about recording. People that love the song will watch it, and I want to kind of explain without getting into the nitty gritty, just about the challenges of doing these kind of overdubs, what you guys kind of were doing at the time. So.
Yeah, interesting.
It's a lot of stuff. This is by far the most complex song I've ever tried to break down before.
That's funny.
I mean, it really has no parallel.
No, I guess it doesn't. No. It's unusual, and it's still got secrets. That's the lovely thing. It's kind of, in a way, I think it's nice that Freddie didn't sit down and do this. Because you'd have been trying to get out of him, what did you actually mean? Why are you saying this? Why won't they let him go? What's going on? And I'm just so glad that it never happened, because it's all in our minds, which is what he wanted.
Well, in the future, you and I are going to do a breakdown of one of your songs, like you said. So I definitely want to do that. But I want to come there and interview you in person at some point. Right. I'd love to schedule that.
Yeah, come see my place, my pad.
Love to. Brian, thank you so much for spending the time today. This is really
great talking to you, Rick.
Such an honor.
Mr. Beato. The Beat-O goes on.
Want to once again thank Brian for being my guest, and remind you, if you've stuck around this long, to subscribe to this channel, Rick Beato 2. That's all for now. Don't forget to subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment. Check out my new Quick Lessons Pro guitar course that just came out. Also, the Beato book, if you want to learn about music theory, that's how you do it. And check out my Beato ear training course at beatoeartraining.com. And don't forget, if you want to support the channel even more, think about becoming a member of the Beato Club. Thanks so much for watching.